This is the Shahid Shah Show. Straight talk on building, buying, and investing in digital health. No hype, no buzzwords, no speculation. Just what actually works, maybe what doesn't, and most importantly, why. If you're building healthcare technology or buying it, this is where reality shows up. In the last episode, we talked about the gross plus the algorithm framework. Gross means getting rid of stupid stuff, and the algorithm was Elon Musk's general view of how engineering difficult and hard things should be done. The idea is first you question the requirement, then you delete what you can, you then simplify what remains, and then, only then, do you automate. If you've had a chance to share that framework with anyone inside a healthcare organization, you already know what happened next. You probably shared the episode with them, discussed what your ideas were about deleting things before you add things, and probably somebody in the room said, that's a great idea, but we can't really do that here. And then they give you a reason. Healthcare has a remarkable institutional capacity for generating reasons why change is impossible. You'll probably hear regulations require this workflow. Our EHR doesn't support that. Clinicians won't accept it. Healthcare is just too complex. We need AI to solve this. Oh, you're just being naive. There's no way that that would work here, right? When you think about these are all just excuses. These responses arrive quickly, confident, and with an air of authority that makes the challenge feel naive. If you try to challenge these well-worn things that you've done over and over and over again, you're challenging people's orthodoxy in your institution. But when you examine them carefully, when you actually trace them back to their source, most of them turn out not to be constraints at all. They're choices. Somebody made these choices. Somebody put the field in the EHR. Somebody pretended that regulations were necessary without ever reading the law and put it into the workflow. Somebody assumed that clinicians want to do something this way versus that way, and then it never came up for discussion again. Those clinicians might even not be there, even if they made the choices. And that's what we have to remember. They're choices. Choices that somebody made at some point that calcified the assumptions, that became the invisible architecture of how things are done. And the difference between a constraint and a choice matters enormously, because constraints have to be respected. Choices can be revisited. Today, we're going to work through the 5 objections that show up almost every time somebody tries to simplify a healthcare workflow. Not to dismiss them, some of them contain a real grain of genuine truth, but to examine them honestly, because in most cases, the grain is much smaller than the objection implies. And because accepting those objections uncritically is one of the most expensive technology mistakes a healthcare leader can make. Now, remember what I said. It's an expensive technology mistake because you often buy tech to go automate something that probably doesn't need to be automated. But let's start from the builder side first. Builders encounter these objections on approximately every sales call that we take. Say you're a startup. You've been building something that eliminates a step. You've done the getting rid of stupid stuff or gross analysis. You know which documentation fields have no clinical value. You know which approval workflow was designed for a problem that no longer exists. Your product makes the step disappear. You walk into the room, you explain what the product does, and within 15 minutes, somebody says, we can't really change that because of regulations. And a bunch of sighs occur in the room. This is the first and most powerful objection. So let's be specific about what the research actually shows. A 2016 study published in the Annals of Internal Medicine estimated that U.S. physician practices spend more than $15 billion annually just to report quality measures and comply with payer documentation requirements. Staggering number. And the study's finding was that much of its results, not from federal mandates, but from payer-specific requirements, institutional interpretations of these regulations, and organizational policies that were created defensively and never revisited. It's nobody's fault. Bureaucracy, institutional calcification, all kinds of bad things happen. But the National Academy of Medicine's report on clinician burnout reaches a similar conclusion. Excessive documentation and poorly designed EHR workflows are major contributors to clinician burnout. And a significant portion of that documentation burden is not federally required. It's institutionally self-imposed. No amount of mental health days, no amount of time off is going to change the fact that we're doing stupid stuff over and over and over again. If that's the case, and we can solve even 1% of burnout or 5% of burnout or 25% of burnout, just stopping to do the stupid stuff, isn't it worth it? So when someone says regulations require it, the appropriate response is not to back down. It's to ask a very specific question. Now, I've done this in the highest levels of government, whether it's in military, whether it's in federal, you have to ask, what regulation are you talking about? And if there's no citation, not a particular paragraph or something that has been pointed out in a citation of a regulation, then don't believe it. You're going to be surprised how often the answer is either unclear or leads back to an institutional policy that was never actually connected to a regulatory requirement in the first place. Lawyers even do this. They say regulations required. And then when I simply ask, oh, could you point me to the citation, please? Where in the Federal Register does this occur? What is the legislation in which this requirement is there? And you will be so surprised that most of the time, even lawyers can't back up what they're saying because they have seen an interpretation of an interpretation. The best lawyers know exactly what they're talking about, and they will tell you precisely what rule it is, and you believe them. But if you're not a lawyer or you're just a person that's been following rules, when asked which regulation, what's the citation, and which paragraph of which rule, you'll find out that most people cannot answer that question, and therefore, it's probably not regulatory, it's probably just institutionally mandated. Now, the second objection often is, our systems won't allow it. This one is interesting because it often contains a kernel of truth wrapped inside a much larger avoidance. It's true that EHR systems are complex and that changing and challenging them requires work. It's true that some configurations require vendor involvement. It's true that IT resources are constrained and that change management can take time. All of that's real. What's not true is that systems themselves are preventing simplification. EHR systems are usually extraordinarily configurable. I'm a builder of EHR systems, been doing it for decades, and I know alerts can be suppressed. I know templates can be modified. I know many required fields can be made optional. Workflows can be reorganized. Health systems customize their EHR configurations constantly. They do it for revenue cycle reasons. They do it when regulators require it. In reality, they do it when a physician champion is motivated enough to push it through. A doctor who is making the hospital millions of dollars a year can make something happen that the poor nurse or front desk staff or an admin staff might not be able to champion and push through the same way. The question is not whether the system can change. The question is whether leadership is willing to commit the resources to changing it. That's an important distinction. Our systems won't allow it is a technical claim. We haven't prioritized changing it is an organizational admission. Now, go back a couple of episodes, we talked about decision-making being the requirement for a governance process. Reducing a decision debt is a necessity. How can you reduce decision debt if you don't make decisions? How can you reduce burnout if you're not willing to admit that this is an organizational setup and that you're only doing it because your organization wants it done, not because some magical alien in the sky is watching you and making sure that you don't do it? Builders who accept our system won't allow it at face value are accepting an organizational avoidance as a technical fact, so don't do that. Now let's talk about the third objection, which is the one that frustrates me most. You often will hear, clinicians just won't accept it. This one is stated as if clinicians are some monolithic block of change-resistant traditionalists. They're almost like robots who are going to defensively protect any workflow, no matter how burdensome, simply because it's familiar. The research says something completely different. When Melinda Ashton and her team at Hawaii Pacific Health launched the Getting Rid of Stupid Stuff program, they invited frontline clinicians to submit examples of EHR processes that added no value and should be removed. The response was not resistance, the response was enthusiasm. Clinicians submitted example after example. They'd been waiting, in some cases for years, for somebody to just ask the question and give them permission to remove work that they already knew was pointless. The research on physician burnout tells the same story, consistently. Clinicians are not resistant to change. They are resistant to technology that makes their work harder. And in that way, they're not different than any one of us. How many of us are asked to come back after a sales call and enter the dumbest stuff in the world into a CRM? How many times are we asked by our bosses, hey, twice a week, I need you to summarize what you did in the last 4 days, put it into an email so that I don't read it 3 days from now. We're all asked to do stupid stuff all the time. And we have to worry when we say things like, oh, clinicians won't accept this. They like doing stupid stuff, right? Nobody says that, but that's what they mean. A digital health product that removes unnecessary steps, that eliminates redundant data entry, that gets clinicians out of the EHR and back to the patient, that product does not encounter clinician resistance. It encounters advocacy. This is why you see the ambient scribe being pushed. It's why you see open evidence being promoted. It's why you saw the iPhone being promoted before it was even allowed in most places. Because when something makes sense, you don't need to convince anybody. You just show it to them and things get pushed. Clinicians become the champion. They push the project forward internally. They defend the contract renewal. They refer you to their colleagues at other health systems. The clinician resistance objection is usually invoked to protect a workflow decision that leadership made, probably or usually without clinical input. When you ask clinicians whether the workflow should exist, they often agree it shouldn't. For buyers, this is a diagnostic signal worth paying attention to. If your organization's leadership consistently cites clinician resistance as a reason not to simplify workflows, ask whether clinicians were actually consulted in a meaningful survey, in realistic, documented ways. Not a perfunctory survey, a real conversation. In my experience, almost always the answer is yes. If you ask properly, here's what we're thinking of removing. Do you think it should go? Faster than you expected from people who have been quite frustrated with that workflow for a longer than anyone in leadership realized. You only get resistance to delete a step when some vendor or someone in some chain needed that as part of organizational protection. Sometimes it does show up properly if you need it for claims or if you need it for enhanced documentation. Not everything is stupid stuff, but there are lots of stupid stuff. The fourth objection is the philosophical one. Healthcare is too complex. This one deserves some respect because it's not entirely wrong. Healthcare is complex. Clinical decision-making involves completing risks, incomplete information, patient values, and biological variability that makes it unlike most other domains. But here's what too complex objection usually conflates. It conflicts clinical complexity with operational complexity, as if they're the same thing. Clinical complexity is real and unavoidable. Operational complexity is often self-inflicted. Aviation is genuinely complex. Nuclear power is genuinely complex. Spaceflight is genuinely complex. And those industries have learned something that healthcare hasn't fully absorbed. Complex systems require simpler processes, not more complicated ones. Adding layers of process in response to every new problem is not how you manage complexity. It's how you lose control of it. The fifth objection has emerged more recently, and it's worth naming specifically because it's becoming more common. And we'll cover this right after the break. This is the Shahid Shah Show, where I cover lots of topics around builders and buyers of healthcare technology. Today, we're talking about an extension of getting rid of stupid stuff and helping understand all the objections that you often get when you try to remove something from a process and we're going to talk about the next one, which is we need AI to solve this. So instead of removing something stupid, we just say we're going to use AI to help us solve this problem. This is the objection that jumps straight to step 5 of the algorithm. Remember, step 5 of the algorithm is automation. And earlier than automation, you're supposed to do deletion. Instead of questioning the requirement, deleting the unnecessary step and simplifying the process, the organization buys an AI tool to perform the unnecessary step faster. Now, we discussed this in our previous conversations, that the prior authorization bot is a perfect example here. We're being asked in upcoming regulations to help improve and automate prior authorization. Fantastic idea. Its time has come, but let's not just look at the documentation AI that AI generates for workflows that should have been simplified first. The monitoring dashboard that uses machine learning to triage alerts from prior authorization that probably shouldn't exist at all. This is automation of the wrong things, executed at scale with machine efficiency. Musk's algorithm is explicit about this failure mode. If you automate before you delete, you build infrastructure around a problem. You make the problem harder to remove later. You create vendor relationships, data dependencies, and workflow assumptions that are now wrapped around a process that should have been eliminated in the first place. The AI trap is real, and the business model consequences are even more real. AI tools are expensive. Implementation is expensive. Drift occurs. Testing is hard. Maintenance is expensive. Retraining is expensive. Governance is expensive. It's a lot easier to get rid of a stupid thing than to add AI in order to help automate it. If you're paying all those costs to automate a workflow that should have been deleted, you're not investing in innovation. Don't kid yourself. You're investing it in a more sophisticated way of doing a stupid thing. The organizations that are going to get the best return on AI investment are the ones that are doing deletion first. They identify what should go away, they remove it, and then they apply AI to the smaller, cleaner set of tasks that are remaining. The AI is cheaper to implement, faster to train, and more reliable in operation. If you replace the word AI with any technology, call it digital therapeutics. Delete something first and then implement digital therapeutics. It'll be cheaper, faster, easier to implement. Take digital health, adding a medical device. If you delete steps and then add a really good medical device, you get a better outcome in general. Now, all of this really is a leadership problem. Anytime you have objections, somebody's got to either say the objection or believe the objection and help maintain it. This is where the leadership problem occurs. The real test of leadership in healthcare technology is not how many systems an organization has deployed. It's not how sophisticated the AI strategy looks in the annual report. It's definitely not how many vendor partnerships are announced at the next conference. The real test is how much unnecessary work the organization has eliminated. Wouldn't it be cool if we could add that as a metric to each boss, leader, executive manager? Everybody's work plans should have some sort of metric that says, how many stupid things did we eliminate this quarter, this year? That's a harder question to answer. It requires someone to stand up and say that a process that has been running for 10 years is not just inefficient, but wrong. Not inefficient, but stupid. It's worth deleting. It requires taking ownership of the discomfort that comes with changing long-standing workflows. It requires leadership being willing to challenge a payer's documentation requirement, or a vendor's default configuration, or a compliance policy that no one has revisited since it was written. Poor leadership accepts the objections. Good leadership interrogates them. That doesn't mean you're going to be able to delete everything. But what if you start with 1 out of 1,000 things, and then you get to 5, and then you get to 15? Pretty soon, you can build a culture within months in which your governance, where you're trying to make decisions, ends up asking about deletion first, before automation. Now, getting past the leadership issues, let's go to buyers. For buyers, here's a practical discipline to apply before the next technology purchase. Require that your team proposing the initiative answer one question before the technology discussion begins. What existing process will this eliminate? If they can't answer it, organization hasn't done the deletion work yet, and that part of the conversation in the governance meetings will help move the conversation along. Let me close with the synthesis, because I want to make sure that this lands as something actionable rather than just a critique. And we know in healthcare organizations, most people in general want to do the right thing. Sometimes they know how, sometimes they don't know how. Now, every organization has a process that everyone complains about and nobody has removed. So let's just start there. You know the one, the alert that fires on every patient regardless of clinical context. The documentation field that every physician games with the template because it doesn't reflect anything real. That might be the approval workflow that everyone routes around because it just takes 3 weeks. It might be that darn committee that meets monthly to discuss initiatives that are never actually approved. Same conversation we've had multiple times about lack of decision making in governance meetings. Could be the thing that you go start deleting, is to say, hey man, if this meeting does not make a decision, we're not going to have it. These things persist not because they're technically necessary or regulatorily required or clinically essential. Find those items, question everything. They often persist because removing them requires someone to own the decision. It's a lot of work. It's just a lot easier to just let people do whatever they want to do. Someone has to say this should go. Someone should follow through when the first objection arrives. Someone has to ask, which regulation specifically when the compliance card gets played? That's not a check question. It's a leadership question. And the market rewards organizations that answer it well. Vendors charge less when they're selling into a system that knows what it wants and has done the work to remove what it doesn't need. Implementations go faster when the workflow is already simplified before the tech arrives. Staff adoption is higher when the new system is obviously less burdensome than the old one. Contract renewals are easier when the ROI is visible. The economics of simplification are real. The organizations that do this work don't just get better outcomes, they get better prices, faster implementations, and more loyal vendor relationships. Now think about all of this, and we haven't even brought up the patient yet. What if the patient got to feel that they had input? They have the ability to submit on a mobile phone or on a piece of paper something stupid that they saw. What if your organization was so open and so honest, letting the customers and your patients and your vendors know, hey, we want to stop doing stupid stuff. Tell us when you see something stupid. Now, it may be that only one time out of 100 it really is stupid, but it could be 10 times out of 100. It could be 50 times out of 100. You just don't know because you're too afraid to ask that question. Your leaders are too afraid to ask that question. Share this episode with them. Let them talk to you about why certain things are necessary without the excuses that we were talking about. If you work in healthcare, think about one process in your organization that everyone complains about, but nobody has removed. Not the most complex one. That's the dumb way to start. The most obvious one. Take something simple, take something obvious, the one where if you ask 10 clinicians whether it should exist, 9 of them would say no before you finish the sentence. Why does it still exist? Is it truly required or is it an institutional habit? If it is a habit, who has the authority to change it? And what would it take to get them to use it? Those are the questions worth bringing to your next leadership conversation. Post your examples on our site. Send me the email. Ask me. If you're afraid of talking to your bosses, you're afraid of figuring out how to present something really dumb that you see might be dumb, maybe having a private conversation via email, sending us the examples, letting us share it amongst others within our listening audience can help us all. Imagine if we all set a rule that said, by the end of 2026, as a community, we're going to have a list of 1,000 things across 100 hospitals that we all worked as a community to help delete. Let's imagine how big that innovation could be. The innovation is not more AI. The innovation is not more technology. The innovation is not a new thing that we could do. The innovation is, hey, we've built cruft layers upon cruft layers upon cruft layers. What can we do to adjust that? So Dr. Ashton's getting rid of stupid stuff, in addition to the Musk algorithm, they're both doing the same thing, talking about the same approaches in two different ways. One is an engineering view of the world, one is a clinical view of the world. But what we are here doing is engineering processes. Now, in the last couple of episodes, we talked about making decisions. Then we talked about what is getting rid of stupid stuff. In this episode, we talked a lot about the reality of objections and how objections that are ungrounded in fact are not really objections. They're just excuses. And what we all have to do is make fun of excuses. If you don't know how to make fun of the excuses, let's talk about it. Let's ask real questions. Let's ask about real experience. Let's have real decisions that we talk about. And then the business models that make all of that actually possible. And sometimes the business models break because we end up doing stupid stuff. The excuses are not the obstacle. The excuses are the problem. This is the Shahid Shah Show. And until next time, keep innovating, but stay real and practical.